In a sense, what I would really say is the Catholic Church, following your discussion, it's not a church. It's a power-seeking institution of domination that has co-opted that word church and sort of hides under that cloak of holiness, right?
Welcome to the Worth the Fight podcast, where we bring you powerful conversations surrounding the sensible and therapeutic use of psychedelics and plant medicines towards healing trauma. I'll introduce you to guests who, through their own personal journey and transformation, tell the Worth the Fight story. I'm your host, Matt Simpson, author of Worth the Fight, Acting for a Better World, a guide to spirituality, psychedelic medicines, and overcoming trauma. Thank you for listening. My next guest on the Worth the Fight podcast is Bob Otis Stanley. Bob is a longtime steward of Oakland's Sacred Garden community, member of Chacruna's Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants, and he was a founding chairperson of Decriminalized Nature Oakland. He is a clinical and molecular informatics researcher by day with over 35 years of personal and group experience with sacred plants. Bob has psychology and religious studies degrees from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Bob earned a master's degree in divinity from the University of Chicago and did postgraduate cognitive science studies at New York University, which led him to professional work in life science informatics. Bob is committed to growing respectful access to traditional plant sacraments and to their newly recognized relatives. Bob and the folks over at Chacruna are putting together an epic gathering, the Psychedelic Liberty Summit, April 20th in San Francisco, California. This will be a special gathering, people coming together in the spirit of harmony to push forward these vital conversations around psychedelic medicines. I've included a link to buy tickets in the show notes, and we cover this incredible gathering towards the end of our conversation. We really push the edges on this conversation. Bob is a kindred spirit who looks at the world in a similar fashion. I revere him as a religious scholar and was very much looking forward to this conversation with the knowing that we haven't talked much about the spirituality aspect of these sacred plant medicines and that I revere so deeply for some of the deep healing that I've done and what I've seen with my eyes and the hope that I have for this better world that I think that we're all earnestly seeking to create. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Bob Otis. Thank you so much for listening. Bob, what is your case for the direct experience over dogma?
That's a great question. I really enjoy that question. I guess I'll start maybe with a simpler.
We're diving right in.
I'll start maybe with a simpler sort of short answer on that, which is to say, first of all, direct experience is something that we all have. So there's something special about that fact of direct experience. Matt, you have that in your life of being and truth about your experience. And so do I. And so focusing on direct experience over dogma when it comes to understanding the value of sacred plant work, or I'll be blunt, I'll say even things like religion more generally, is helping also recognize your own agency in your search for healing and insight, right? So if I'm claiming that I have some special information that I read in a book and you have to believe me, you know, that may help you in some process towards direct experience, but ultimately it has to be your own experience that defines truth for you. And I believe through the sacred plant work, what we can actually find too is that there is actually universal truth that can be opened up by each one of our own unique direct experience.
Beautifully said. Wonderful. That resonates, the idea of agency and, finding that on my personal journey, my personal healing journey, feeling like I found agency for the first time in my life at 35 years old after a profound healing with the sacred plant medicine ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have that be something where I could challenge from that point, challenge some of the dogmas that subsequently I came to realize were making me ill.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And there's something that seems magical about that. What I'm understanding of the direct experience that you've had with ayahuasca, and I'm gonna share with joy and recognition that you and I have both engaged experiences with ayahuasca, Matt. So I'm confident that our experiences are unique to each of our own bodies and our own, the way that we approach that plant. But at the same time, I really feel that, and conversation, I believe, bears out that there's some deep common nature to the experience that we can each have when we're going deep in a meditation, for example, with the sacred plant. And one of those things which I find quite fascinating is this relationship between agency that we're just talking about, realizing that it is we are the ones who are on our own path to healing, and there's no one but us, who makes that happen. We are the practitioners in our own healing. At the same time, it's like there's this recognition that comes with that agency of something like surrendering or letting go of everything we thought, maybe a lot of what we thought before, so it's such an interesting teaching where that's where I really believe that wisdom can come through those plant experiences, where at the same time you realize, oh, it's up to me to understand truth. And then at the same time, you're like, and I didn't understand as much as I thought, and I need to let go and listen, so it's like you gain agency and the ability to listen at the same time. And that's something to be thankful for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why do you think there's such resistance to some of these conversations around truth and around the sacred plants and around religion? What do you think is, the idea that, dogma is, for something on my path, like it kept me safe.
Mm-hmm.
Or these mental constructs, these belief systems kept me safe for many years. And then those same belief systems started in my early 30s, started to endanger me. And this incessant drive for truth and for challenging things, and perhaps maybe having the healthy enough nervous system to challenge ideas. I think that often these dogmas that don't serve our evolution on an individual and a collective level are kind of wet blankets that shield people from the truth.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. This is such a lovely conversation, Matt. I just love these topics. So thank you so much for just opening this up. And I always kind of like to try to lead into a conversation with what have I learned in plant meditations, or what have I learned in deep meditation, right? And so there are these interesting sorts of teachings, and there's this all and perspective that I'm trying to integrate into my life, that I'm trying to understand, which is this experience I'll have sometimes during a deep journey, that everything exists, and that's a big that's a big fuzzy statement. What do I make any meaning out of that? The reason why I'm saying that is that there's some ways of feeling that I think can help us with compassion, and compassion for ourselves, and compassion for history, and compassion for the religions of the world and the structures of the world, the dogmas that carry us to where we are. Okay. And so, I'll propose to you that each of our egos, like this thing that calls itself Bob Otis, and I, have the experiences that I'll talk about, in a way, everything that's holding me and allowing me to talk to you, it's the Bob dogma, right? It's my ego. It's who I think I am. Okay. Because I exist in time and space, it's kind of a static thing. It moves sort of slowly. Sometimes it's not right. There's all these things. Similarly, there's a dogma of modernity, right? Capitalism and science and all these things. There's the dogmas of Christianity. You get the story. So the rich thing for me is this both and perspective that comes for me out of this plant practices, which have helped me gain some compassion for everything, to be blunt, which is these dogmas have gotten us this far, right? So, like, maybe there was some trauma that I experienced when I was serving my country, or not that I'm not a military person, but just to speak abstractly. Or maybe there was some trauma that I experienced growing up with my family, or whatever that may be. And there may have been some ways of thinking and feeling that I came up with that really helped me make it through that tough time, right? But then later on, I may be bringing that dogma on forward with me, and that may be saying, I need to protect myself against people who are going to hurt me, and people will hurt me, for example, or something like that. And that dogma can become constraining and restricting because I'm in a new time, in a new space. So just continuing to sort of listen to our bodies and our experience, our direct experience of reality, those sticky old dogmas that are no longer helpful, those are going to be the things that are going to come up in a journey, right? And they're going to say, hey, there's some pain here. There's something blocking you from being connected to reality here. Now I can be compassionate. Maybe it was helpful to get me to where I am, and that's an amazing gift. I can be here right now. So I can be thankful, even though that dogma may be hurting me now and it may have hurt me in the past. Is that making sense, Matt?
Yeah, I love that. Everything is a lesson, and what was once a medicine could be a poison. I think that we shift and we evolve, and as we grow, often we have to shed and let go in order to make room for clear energy for new things to come forth. That's totally makes sense. You'd said something that really resonated on our pre-call a few weeks back, that church is supposed to be a community for the search of truth. And it doesn't really appear to be that anymore, or at least my experience. I think that can you comment on that as to why you think that is, or where the disconnect is, or how organized religion has gotten off base or off track?
Yeah, sure. And that's another one of these areas that I believe, I do a lot of work with the group Chacruna as a member of the Council for Protection of Sacred Plants there, and then also with Sacred Garden Community as a garden steward. And one of the areas that we're really trying to focus is on what is good practice, what is a healthy way of being, what is, to be blunt, particularly with Chacruna, kind of what is maybe corruption of a practice, right? What is a unsafe practice, unhelpful practice, dominating practice? When I say practice, I could also call that practice of religion or practice of truth seeking, right? So there's another one of these, I like to sort of say, well, what does the deep meditation teach us? And there's this sense about the meaning of something. What was the birth, and what's the positive meaning of something versus what's the corruption of something. So it's like everything has its beauty. And as you were just mentioning, there is an intended meaning, I will propose, of a real thing, right? That's what I'm trying to get at. There are these real things that sustain us. And for example, having community who will help us in our own search for meaning and truth, I believe that's a good thing, right? That's something that I cherish, and I'm so thankful for, that I've been able to find it in my life, right? Community who are concerned with my own desire to find meaning and peace and truth, and want to help me, and maybe have some experience, some wisdom, some prior direct experience and practice. That's something to cherish, right? So that's what I would call the meaning of religion. And there's this whole field of philosophy called hermeneutics, and they would talk about hermeneutics of retrieval. And you want to try to retrieve the meaning of a word from its own corruption. Okay. Now this all gets to be political, and I'm trying to understand this myself, but there's one thing which is the meaning of something. There's something else which is the corruption of it. And you can find that really quickly. And it's not religion. It's not in a sex. It's not in a race. It's not in a country. It's some problem that can happen anywhere, which is corruption. And that's when something else, like the desire for control or power, maybe led by fear or desire, will co-opt the power of that word. So, religion is a powerful thing. Community to help us find truth and meaning. That's like practically the best thing in the world, right? Loving community to help us understand who we are. That's a great thing. I want that. I need that. So unfortunately, there seems to be something that will also attract
the corruption.
Yeah. And I'm still trying to understand where that comes from and how to avoid that, right?
Yeah, that's that really sets up the next segue of our conversation here. I I see the value that organized religion has. And, typically we don't point fingers, but I'm going to point a finger. I think that the Catholic Church is at the bottom of the rabbit hole of all the war and conflict that we see here on earth.
Mm.
And it's not always a popular statement, but I believe that and to be true in my heart of hearts, that this unchecked systematic child sex abuse that the church perpetuates is fueling and driving war. They're creating the soldiers and the people that are fighting in these wars, with the unique angle that I have of advocating for our United States war veterans that are in the midst of a mental health crisis and suicide epidemic. We found time and time again that it's not the war trauma that they're healing from, it's the childhood sexual trauma. And, it's a dirty and a messy conversation, but time and time again, it's that sexual trauma that appears to be driving our warriors to enlist in the military and then fight in these wars. And there's from our anecdotal experience, Sebastian Junger, I've quoted this a few times on the podcast. He's a foremost expert on PTSD, homecoming, and belonging, and he has some troubling statistics in his book Tribe, where the research shows that the war veterans in Iraq and Afghanistan, the modern day soldiers, are 2 times more likely to have reported childhood sexual trauma in the early years of childhood development than those that fought at random in Vietnam. Mind you, I said report. Anybody that knows anything about sexual trauma, it's a really tough thing to talk about. So it's grossly underreported. And then what we've seen, I've been advocating for these veteran organizations, and I think that we've reached a time where sitting on the sidelines and ignoring these realities makes the ignorer just as complicit as the pedophile priests.
Right. Well, that's
I'm at you there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot that could be unpacked in this discussion, and the first thing I want to say is that I just feel the compassion and the sorrow of your experience. I think you're gaining some insights that are difficult, Matt. I can really hear that. I appreciate the depth of the feeling that I can hear from this conversation. So I'm just going to let that be for a minute. Everything doesn't always need to be reacted to, and I'm just we can both be sorry together about some of that history, right?
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah. It's a lot. And I think that sorrow is what keeps, and the inability, the dissonance that this causes people, this notion of the church fueling war, it creates dissonance. And years back when I had a garbled up nervous system, this is something I would have not been able to handle. It would have made me go berserk. But I've retinkered my nervous system, and I can sit with this duality and this reality and present it as truth as I know it. Right.
So there's so much to chew on with this discussion. So, right out of the gate, with my family having a Quaker ancestry, and then, my aunts and uncles all being MDs and pastors, there's a lot of love for something that I feel is the healthy nature of church, right? And I know that's also can be in the same way that some people will be really triggered by asserting the Catholic Church as the source of a lot of this suffering that we're talking about. Others would be really upset by asserting that a church can be a healthy thing, right? So it's kind of a rich conversation there. And in a sense, what I would really say is the Catholic Church, following your discussion, it's not a church. It's a power-seeking institution of domination that has co-opted that word church and sort of hides under that cloak of holiness, right? Now, I'm sure that there is some intention for healing and helpfulness and holiness in many members of the Catholic Church, right?
Sure. There's beautiful people, of course.
Yeah. But at the same time, what's really, I think, clearly represented in your discussion is this whole process that moves from control structure through dogma, claiming, for example, just to go right into it now, this whole shaming on sexuality that is, in my opinion, probably a real control strategy, right?
It's their best tactic. It's their most powerful tactic.
Right. So there's this radical shaming, and now here's that ironic thing that where we're talking about dogma and ego. A lot of these, I'm sure these priests and people going in, they're not going in thinking, oh, I'm going to take a power domination strategy and control people the rest of my life. What they're thinking is, I want to be a good person. I want to be a good priest. That means I should be ashamed of sexuality, and I should be ashamed of who I am. I have to hide who I am, in order to be a good person, because I believe this dogma that's come down up from corruption, right? And then you end up getting these priests who are suffering radical disintegration internally, hiding from who they are. And that's a classic recipe for shadow, for demons to emerge. You get my point?
Yeah.
And this is a lot of what I think is happening with humankind, which is that we have all these control structures and trauma history that has come down to us. We've had to learn to hide all of these aspects about who we are from even ourselves, right? For all these different defense reasons and survival reasons, and because I want to be a good person and I don't know why I'm being beaten, and so I have to hide who I am from myself. All this kind of stuff happens. And then you get this unconscious expression of all the shadow, right? And so this is also, just to take to the next step, another area where there is a real grace to working with these plant sacraments. And I believe these are sacraments. Part of the definition of sacrament is connects to truth or connects to the divine, right? And these sacraments help us connect to truth about who we are inside. There's a lot of hidden trauma and suffering. There's a lot of misunderstanding that we've received from history, right, about who we are. And when we work with these plants, that's one thing that happens. You can, if you're in a safe place where you're in a healing frame, you better bet there's an opportunity for a lot of that historical trauma to come up, right, when you're engaging a plant journey. And then there's another reason why these are true sacraments, because when these things come up, something wonderful happens with your consciousness, which you can see what's happening with those problems from every direction, from every perspective, from before and after time. Before it happened, what was happening before my father or my mother or my priest traumatized me. You can, the sacraments open up that ability to really get a much bigger view into the sort of source and cause of trauma, which I'll say is corruption, and the alienation that comes with that. Whew.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there as well. But the notion that having compassion, having this opportunity to look at our traumas from a 360-degree angle, and then ultimately having, I'm thankful for all of the challenges, all of the dogma, all of the pain, everything that I've been through to this point. I am so gosh darn thankful for. And I wouldn't be on this journey. I wouldn't be engaging in this service work. I wouldn't have this love pouring out of my heart if I didn't go through that. But that doesn't mean that I condone the abusers and the abuse. It just means that the shit stops with me. Right. And so I think that is really profound, your angle of looking at this. And this also came to mind. Sam Harris. Are you familiar with Sam Harris?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Silly question. And he broaches in these waters, these taboo waters often. And he says something, that the idea that if we had any Fortune 500 company that habitually or systematically employed sexually confused men, we would run them out of town so fast. But the church gets a blind eye. And energetically, we're on the sidelines, and we sit on the sidelines and watch this go by. And it's my hope and prayer that this work and the message that we're pushing forward, and the psychedelics as medicine movement, moving responsibly through and healing the hearts and minds of those that are really struggling, will start to get that notion out, so we can start questioning this and start, instead of a few of us speaking up, we can have real action, and maybe lean on these institutions so they can reform and they can change and they can let go of the dogmas that are fueling this evil.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. This is also an interesting conversation. Now I can kind of take it into more traditional plant practices and things that are happening today in the psychedelic community. It's sort of rich. There are kind of two different paths we can discuss. One is this process of hopefully experiencing one's self in a true and compassionate way, right? That plants can open up, experiencing the impact of different behaviors and different institutions on ourselves. We can gain insight into the impact of what perhaps like serving in the military may have had, or what the church impact had with us. All of those things can happen working with sacred plants. There's a lot of, I'll say, it's actually, I believe it's not magic. I believe it's biology, but it's also magic with those plants that can really help in healing that way. At the same time, we're all laboring under the dogma of our culture and time and history. That's in our body, and we filter our experience with the plants through those things still, right? And that continues to happen. And it's the reason why I'm mentioning that is because there's a lot of work that also needs to happen and is happening in other traditional cultures. Simply because people work with ayahuasca doesn't mean that the taita or the maestro or the curandero actually has really understood all about consent and diversity in sex and gender and things like that, right? So unfortunately, there can also be abuses that can occur down in the jungle, and those things happen too, right?
Yeah,
and so
on the other side of the fence.
Yeah. Right. So there's history that we're coming out of in terms of histories of patriarchy and maybe historical domination that has been related to sex in many cultures, right, or gender. Those things we need to come out of as humans, and I'm thankful. I believe that working with sacred plants can help us kind of see some of those issues more clearly, and also in a way with compassion for ourselves, right, for our own history, so that we can forgive and we can allow those feelings to move through, not to forgive in a naive way, but to forgive understanding the sort of cycles of trauma that can cause new trauma. And like you said, then committing to no new trauma, starting now, right? And that's actually one of the sort of fun little aphorisms of Sacred Garden Community, which we try to fulfill, which is no new trauma, right? Mm-hmm. So we can accept the history of abuse and harm and trauma. It has happened, right? And so trying to be compassionate and learn where that comes from so that we can avoid that is, I think, a goal.
I think that's a wonderful goal. Very eloquently said. And it's my hope and prayer that this is the work that we're doing here to not belabor the past, but to learn from it and to catalyze that energy. At the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of advocating for our war veterans and this immense subgroup of people that are struggling, and they're in it with the post-traumatic stress and the traumatic brain injury, mm-hmm. and getting them these medicines that work, where they can heal, where they can let go, and where they ultimately can share and lead the way. There's this powerful quote by Thich Nhat Hanh that is my why for kicking off the covers each morning. And it goes like this: veterans are the light at the tip of the candle, illuminating the way for the whole nation. If veterans can achieve awareness, transformation, understanding, and peace, they can share with the rest of us the realities of war, and they can teach us how to make peace with ourselves and each other so we never have violence and conflict again.
Mm-hmm. That's so powerful. There is something about having learned compassion through that sort of deepest pain and suffering that seems to, I'm just going to use big words here, but it can lead into real wisdom, right? There's that depth of understanding that someone who's been through the sort of experience and healing that you're describing can bring, that it's just it's a gift, right, to the rest of us. So it's asking a lot for someone who's been wounded to come back with a gift, right? But I'll tell you, when that happens, it's something to be so grateful for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a profound quote that was hair-raising that Amber Capone, she was a guest with Marcus Capone, They are championing an organization called Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, which are providing plant medicines healing for our Navy SEALs and Special Forces. And she had said something to the fact that they're waking up to our warriors are waking up to the reality that they are approaching their most important mission yet. And that is to be the stewards to bring forth these medicines into our culture, to safely and responsibly bring forth these medicines, with the notion that no one can hide from the conversation of our war veterans amid a mental health crisis and suicide epidemic. 22 die by their own hand each day. We have so many that are homeless. We have so many that are mired in the opioid crisis, and them healing, getting right, sharing, raising their hands, and leading forth with again, upholding the sacred duty and responsibility of knowing that they're trusted. They're trusted here. We value the military here in the U.S. And when a soldier raises his hand and speaks his truth, we all shut up and we listen. And again, to what you were saying earlier, the value of experiential spirituality that trumps any of this nonsense dogma bullshit that we accept as truth. It's the real deals that have been through it that they can teach us. And again, if they can get right, that sends a signal and a subtle invitation to us all that if having gone through the Middle East and going through a real life hell, that if they can get back to being healthy, happy, and strong, then any of us can.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I thank you so much for sharing that. And I was getting a little flash right at the very end when you were talking about, in a sense, going through hell, right? And it's like healing. I have an idea that could be critiqued, that healing needs to come from a healing place. Healing needs to come from a place of quiet, calm, and loving kindness, right? Healing doesn't come from trauma, right? It's like you can't go shout at someone and make them get better, right? You get better, I'm going to kill you, right? But there is a sacred experience, and part of that sacred experience is recognizing the transformation from the experience of hell in your life into an experience of peace and well-being, right? That's a sacred process in my mind. And things, methods, practices that can move a person from the experience of hell into the experience of what I would propose is actually also possible, even in this lifetime while we're alive, which is an experience of heaven, living in a heavenly way where one is full of love and one feels forgiven and one is expressing and receiving love and gratitude, right? That's just it. There can be, even with suffering existing, a person can experience a heavenly state, and that's a healing state. And for someone who goes through that real experience of hell that can come, I think, from combat, again, not having that experience, but from what I understand and being friends with folks in the space, to move through that and to find that place of peace and healing, which sacred plants are a very rare and powerful method that can allow that to happen. That's a sacred process, and someone who goes through that will have grown in wisdom, and that wisdom can bring healing. So, I want to say thank you to plant medicine for its ability to help bring healing to those who have really, which is many of us. The veterans are I think the clear, like you say, the sort of light at the tip of the candle for understanding both that depth of what a hellish experience can be, and then having gone through that healing. So. Absolutely. Thank you, plant medicine. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. To further punctuate that powerful angle, the idea that our warriors are trained, our veterans are trained in leadership, and they know discipline. So I think that it's almost a perfect equation for positive social change on a system-wide level. that, and we're breaking down these taboos, and science is screaming from all four corners of our big, beautiful planet, that these medicines are safe when held with reverence, delivered by qualified professionals, by people that are earnestly hurting. And I say we get our warriors the medicine so they can heal, they can get right, and they can show us the way, and they can engage, because God knows we have enough people hurting here. They can engage the projects that need to be done, that to do the dirty work, that we're scared, that obviously people aren't raising their hands to take on, child sex trafficking, and maybe some of these environmental challenges that we have, or political challenges. The work being done by the folks over at From Shock to Awe is really inspiring, and it left a heavy impression on my heart. But that idea that our warriors can heal, they can get right, and they can run for office. We have this really powerful democratic container, tried and true. It's been tested to the max, and it's being tested right now. And trust that we can infiltrate through getting elected into office, and through leadership in corporations, that we can change the system for better from within. And that's one of the beauties of the free enterprise and the systems that we have is that they're open for that. And that's, of course, the long game, and knowing that this is not going to happen overnight. But I think that the power of these plant medicines is something that is largely misunderstood. And I think that it's latent, meaning that it thrusts people on the growth path. And there's a time, and I'm obviously projecting my own personal experience, and what I've seen is that it takes a good while for people to get their bearings, and to make sense of their hurts, their past, their traumas, and to understand how this growth path works. It takes time. I mean, for me, I was hit by a ton of bricks and stuck on a meditation cushion for 3 years, burning off this immense amount of karma that I had to burn off from my errant ways in my teenage years and my 20s and early 30s, and with ignorance not being an excuse for healing and getting this work done correctly.
Right. Yeah. So there's some lovely themes in what you're just saying, and I think I'm going to try to repackage in a way that I think is going to be, you might find interesting. So, you had mentioned approaching work with what Sacred Garden community will call a plant sacrament, or sacred plant medicine, with care, something like care, discipline, a respectful approach, right? And Sacred Garden community considers these to be sacraments because we believe working with these plants can connect us to truth about who we are, and to truth about being itself, existential being. And when I say truth, that word truth could be spun out in a lot of ways. It could be called divine, or God, or universal ground of being. It can connect us to truth about being. There's something that's really lovely about many of these sacred plants. For example, Nino Santos, the little mushroom, they can actually be quite gentle and really generous and gracious in their guiding us towards healing. So I don't want to overemphasize what I'm going to say next. That having said that, they can be gentle and gracious even to sort of the uninitiated who maybe don't know what they're doing, just kind of get some mushrooms. If one approaches these sacraments with care, respect, and now I'm going to use a term that's really relating also to the men in military, or to the military, which is discipline. Coming into a sacred plant practice with a little bit of personal discipline can really make a big difference in terms of one's ability to encounter and work with that plant in a useful way. You yourself had kind of talked about going through, kind of burning off the karma, right? It's like just to even be able to sit still for 4 or 5 hours, for example, and experience yourself can be very challenging to a lot of folks. And having gone through a lot of that personal discipline that someone can achieve in the military, I think can be very useful for good practice is really what I'm trying to get to. So, I think there is a lot of power there. There's also some really interesting things we're seeing in Oakland and also up in Detroit with folks from different communities, African American communities, and just Oakland, Detroit communities of all kinds who are doing a lot of martial arts work, and then bringing that into their plant practice, where just that ability to be with yourself in a disciplined and mature way can help with the practice. So I'm really giving a strong +1 to, I think, the hopeful nature of having the United States service people, military service people, engaging plant practice from that place of a little bit of self-awareness and discipline, that comes with that military service, right?
Yeah, your point about Detroit and Oakland and people engaging martial arts, and I after I had some profound healing back in 2015, and the logical next step for me was to have my yoga training, but then waking up to the reality that there's just so many gosh darn different ways that we can balance and recalibrate, and different disciplines that we can approach, and none is maybe some are better than others, but it's going to be variant on the person.
Mm-hmm.
And just not getting sucked into that dogma trap of that we talked about earlier, that there's dogma on the other side of the fence, on this side of the fence as well. For me, and now getting to a point in my life where in a perfect world I would practice yoga 5-6 days a week, but I got a lot of things going on, and it's about and shifting my mindset that it's about movement more so, and maintaining a level of discipline that can help with driving my work forward. But yeah, I feel strongly your observation of our war veterans and having that to build around, really.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, you get a little strong groundwork, and then that gives you a place that you can move from. Right. So there may be traumatic experience, but there can also be an experience of sustaining discipline. Right, and those things can help. That's what one of these things. A couple different little ideas kind of spinning out of this discussion for me. One is, in a lot of times to talk about this dogma. So in the sacred plant work, there's a lot about this dogma that is kind of, we have to get rid of our ego. Right. And I think that can make a lot of sense. It can be helpful when people are engaging practice, mostly to let people kind of let go, not try to hold on, right, to my feeling about who I think I am, right? I need to move into a deep meditation, allowing myself to learn that I may be more than I thought I was, right? Or things may be different. But at the same time, that healthy ego is super important. That's the thing that got me to that practice, right? It's the discipline of the person who's saying, hey, I just went through some hell, but I know I am who I am, and I'm there for my buddies, or whatever that may be. I have that discipline. I'm going to seek healing. I'm going to be there. That's actually that disciplined ego bringing a person into that healing. So we really want to appreciate the strength that we can bring into the practice. Then another little idea that you had also mentioned, kind of now speaking a little bit more generally about these different modalities for healing. This is